They said the Badlands of Montana would kill a man before he ever saw the gold. But for Silas Thorne, it wasn't the cold or the wolves that brought him to his knees. It was a woman he was paid to hunt. We've all heard the legends of the Wild West, but the history books leave out the moments that don't fit the narrative. Like the moment deep in a limestone crevasse, when a Lakota fugitive looked a veteran cavalryman in the eye, positioned her legs over his shoulders, and whispered the words that would decide if they lived or died. "Higher. I need you higher." This isn't a romance. It's a story of survival, mistaken identity, and the brutal karma that comes for men who think they own the world. This is the story of the dead man's drop. The year was 1878. The snow in the Montana Territory didn't fall. It was driven sideways by a wind that felt like it had been sharpened on a whetstone. Silas Thorne adjusted the brim of his hat, shielding his eyes against the blinding white of the Bighorn Basin. Silas was a man of few words and fewer friends. A former corporal in the 7th Cavalry, he had left the service with a dishonorable discharge that he refused to discuss, and a set of tracking skills that kept his belly full, mostly. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who did a job, and the job today was worth $2,000. "She's a ghost, Mr. Thorne," the client had said. The client was Governor Samuel Vance, a man whose suit cost more than Silas had earned in a decade. Vance sat in his mahogany-paneled office in Helena, smoking a cigar that smelled of vanilla and corruption. "They call her Winona. She stole deeds, land deeds, vital to the expansion of the railroad. She's Lakota, but she speaks English better than you do. Don't let that fool you. She's savage." Silas had nodded, taken the half payment up front, and ridden out. 2 weeks later, Silas found the ghost. She wasn't hiding in a fortress. She wasn't surrounded by a war party. She was huddled in the lee of a rocky outcropping near the mouth of Painted Canyon, trying to strike a flint to start a fire. Her horse was dead a few yards away, its leg broken in a badger hole. Silas didn't announce himself. He dismounted his roan gelding, drawn his colt Peacemaker, and stepped through the crunching snow. "Don't reach for the knife!" Silas barked, his voice raspy from the cold. The woman froze. She didn't scream. She didn't scramble. She slowly turned her head. She wore a heavy buffalo hide coat, but underneath, Silas could see the hem of a civilized calico dress. Her hair was dark, braided tightly, but her eyes were a piercing, unexpected hazel. "You must be the new one," she said. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "Vance sends a new man every month. You look tired. Stand up, slowly." Winona stood. She was taller than he expected. "You're making a mistake. But I suppose $2,000 helps a man ignore his conscience." "I don't have a conscience, Ma'am. I have a debt." "Now, where are the deeds?" "I burned them," she lied. Silas knew liars. He was one. She hadn't burned them. They were her insurance. "Get on the horse," Silas ordered, gesturing to his roan. "We're going back to Helena. If we go back to Helena, I'm dead, and if you take the pass at night, you're dead too. Vance's men aren't just looking for me, Ranger. They're cleaning up loose ends. Did he tell you that?" Silas paused. Vance had insisted on secrecy. He had insisted Silas go alone. "Move," Silas grunted. He mounted behind her, tying her wrists to the saddle horn. He felt the tension in her back. He thought he had captured a criminal. He didn't realize he had just strapped himself to a lightning rod. The storm broke 3 hours later. It was a whiteout, a wall of snow so dense you couldn't see your horse's ears. Silas was forced to navigate by memory, heading toward an old mining outpost known as Miner's Ridge. "You're going the wrong way," Winona shouted over the howling wind. "Quiet," Silas snapped. "The bridge at the ridge is out. It washed away in the spring thaw. If you ride us onto that ledge, we go over." Silas hesitated. A fugitive would lie to escape, but a local would know the terrain. He pulled the reins, steering the horse toward a cluster of pines, just as a crack of thunder, no, not thunder, echoed through the valley. Gunshot! A bullet whizzed past Silas's ear, taking a chunk out of his hat brim. "I told you," Winona yelled. "They aren't waiting for you to bring me back, you fool. They're waiting to bury us both." Silas spurred the horse. 3 riders emerged from the tree line behind them, dark shapes against the snow. They were riding hard, rifles drawn. These weren't lawmen. They were hired guns, Vance's private cleaners. "Unlock me," Winona demanded, struggling against the ropes. "I can shoot. Not a chance." Silas guided the horse up a narrow goat path, the hooves slipping on the icy granite. The pursuers were gaining. A bullet struck the rock face next to them, spraying stone shards into Silas's cheek. He wiped the blood away, his heart hammering. They reached the plateau of Miner's Ridge. Winona had been right. The bridge was gone. In its place was a gaping chasm, 100-foot drop into the freezing rapids of the Blackfoot River below. They were trapped. Silas spun the horse around, drawing his rifle. "Get down!" he roared, cutting Winona's bonds with his knife. She didn't run. She grabbed the saddlebag he had dropped. "The deeds aren't burnt," she hissed. "They prove Vance stole the land from the reservation and the local ranchers. He forged the signatures. That's why he wants us dead. He can't let me testify, and he can't let you live knowing you found me." Silas looked at the approaching riders, then at the woman. The social justice of it hit him like a physical blow. He had been hired to silence a whistleblower. "Cover me," Silas said, his voice dropping into a dangerous calm. For 10 minutes, the canyon echoed with gunfire. Silas was a marksman, dropping one rider and wounding another's horse, but they were pinned down. A lucky shot from the attackers hit the rock above Silas, causing a mini-avalanche of shale. A boulder the size of an anvil slammed into Silas's shoulder. He screamed, his right arm going instantly numb. His collarbone was shattered. He dropped his rifle, stumbling back toward the edge of the cliff. "Thorn!" Winona screamed. She lunged for him, grabbing his coat just as his boots slipped on the ice. They both went over the edge. They didn't fall to the river. They slammed onto a narrow, snow-covered shelf 20 feet down, an old prospector's ledge hidden from above. Silas hit hard, groaning as pain flared white-hot in his shoulder. Winona landed on top of him, breathless but alive. Above them, the hired guns peered over the edge. "Don't see 'em," one shouted. "Must have hit the water. No one survives that current." "Let's wait an hour. If they don't surface, we ride back and tell Vance the job is done." Silas and Winona lay perfectly still on the freezing ledge, the wind masking their breathing. They were alive, but Silas couldn't move his arm, and the ledge they were on was crumbling. Night fell, bringing a cold that settled in the bones. The ledge was barely 4 feet wide. Above them was 20 feet of sheer, slick limestone. Below them, 80 feet of darkness and roaring water. Silas was going into shock. His face was pale, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. The shattered collarbone and dislocated shoulder had rendered his right side useless. We freeze here," Silas stammered. Winona was busy. She was tearing strips from her petticoats, binding his arm to his chest. "We aren't dying tonight, Thorn. I have too much work to do. There's no way up, not with this arm." Winona looked up. The moon had broken through the clouds, illuminating a single, sturdy pine root protruding from the cliff face about 7 feet above them. If they could reach that root, there was a chimney, a narrow vertical crack that led back up to the plateau, away from where the gunmen were camped. But the root was too high. Silas couldn't climb. Winona couldn't reach it alone. "I need to reach that root," Winona said, analyzing the geometry of the rock. "If I can get a rope around it, I can hoist you up with the leverage of the tree. But I can't jump for it. The ice is too slick." "So?" Silas gritted his teeth against the pain. "So, you have to lift me. I have one arm, lady. You have legs, and you have a back. Stand up." It took Silas 5 minutes to stand. He leaned heavily against the rock wall. Winona positioned herself in front of him. "I'm going to climb you," she said, matter-of-factly. "I'm going to step on your good thigh, then your shoulder. But the angle is wrong. The wall leans outward. If I stand on your shoulders, I'll fall backward into the river." She looked at the rock, then at him. A realization crossed her face. "I have to lock myself in," she muttered. "Thorn, listen to me. I need to sit on your shoulders, facing the wall. Then I need to hook my legs over your shoulders and under your armpits to stabilize myself while I reach back for the root. It's the only way to keep the center of gravity against the wall." It sounded insane. It sounded like a circus trick. But as the wind bit into his exposed skin, Silas nodded. "Do it." Winona moved with the grace of someone who had spent a life in the mountains. She stepped onto his bent left knee, then hoisted herself up. Silas roared in pain as her weight pressed down on his spine, jarring his broken shoulder. "Easy," she whispered. She was straddling his neck now, facing the rock wall. "I can't reach it," she strained, stretching her arm up. Her fingers brushed the frozen dirt inches below the root. "I'm slipping." She looked down at the drop. Then she adjusted her position. She slid her legs forward, hooking her calves firmly under his armpits and over his chest, locking her ankles behind his back. She leaned back, trusting his strength, using her body as a cantilever. It was an intimate, desperate tangle of limbs, driven not by passion, but by the terror of death. "Silas," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I need you to push up, on your toes." "I can't." "You have to. Higher. I need you higher." He felt the warmth of her legs against his frozen neck. He felt the trembling of her muscles as she reached. He thought of Vance, the man eating steak in a warm mansion while they died like dogs. He thought of the lies. With a guttural scream that echoed off the canyon walls, Silas Thorne drove his boots into the ice. He locked his knees. He pushed up onto the very tips of his toes, straining every tendon in his battered body, lifting her those critical 3 inches. Her fingers closed around the pine root. "Got it!" she gasped. But just as she secured her grip, the ledge beneath Silas's feet gave a sickening crack. The sound of stone shearing away from the cliff face was louder than the wind. It was a grinding, thunderous crack that vibrated through the soles of Silas's boots. "Jump!" Winona screamed from above. She had hauled herself onto the narrow lip of the chimney, her muscles screaming, just as the limestone shelf beneath Silas disintegrated. He didn't jump. He fell. Gravity took him, his stomach lurching into his throat, as the ground simply vanished. But the rope snapped taut. In the split second before the ledge gave way, Winona had looped the leather reins she'd salvaged from the saddlebag around the pine root and thrown the loose end down. Silas, driven by instinct and terror, had wrapped it around his good wrist. He slammed into the cliff wall, dangling over the abyss. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and his broken shoulder screamed in a fresh agony that made his vision swim with black spots. He hung there, spinning slowly in the blizzard, 60 feet above the churning black water. "Hold on!" Winona's voice was strained. She wasn't just holding the rope, she was anchoring it with her body weight, wedged into the crevice above. "I can't pull myself up," Silas gasped, the cold already stealing the feeling from his fingers. "Cut it. Save yourself." "Shut up, Ranger," she yelled back. "Wrap the rope around your waist. Do it now." It took 5 agonizing minutes. With one hand and his teeth, Silas managed to secure the leather strap around his midsection. Then, inch by agonizing inch, Winona pulled. She wasn't a large woman, but life on the run had forged her into something unbreakable. She used the leverage of the rock, ratcheting him up until he could get a boot heel on a protruding stone. When Silas finally rolled over the lip of the upper plateau, he didn't stand. He collapsed into the snow, shivering violently. Hypothermia was setting in. Winona didn't rest. She grabbed him by his coat collar. "Get up. If we stay here, the blood in your veins turns to ice. There's a drift tunnel for the mine about a half-mile east. Move!" They stumbled through the storm like drunkards. Silas was delirious, his mind flashing back to the Indian Wars, mixing the faces of the men he'd killed with the face of the woman saving him. They found the mine entrance, a timber-framed hole in the mountain, boarded up but rotting. Winona kicked the planks in. Inside, the air was still and dry, smelling of old dust and rat droppings. It was freezing, but it was out of the wind. Winona built a small, smokeless fire using dried timber supports and old blasting crates. She forced Silas to drink melted snow from a tin cup she found. "Let me see the shoulder," she commanded. Silas groaned as she peeled back the layers of his coat. The bruising was purple and black, spreading across his chest like an ink stain. The bone was tenting the skin, threatening to puncture. "It needs to be set," she said, "or you lose the arm." "Do it," Silas grunted. He bit down on a piece of leather strap. Winona placed her boot against his ribs for leverage. There was no gentleness here, only the brutal necessity of survival. She pulled. The bone snapped back into place with a sickening pop. Silas passed out. When he woke, the fire was dying, and Winona was sitting cross-legged across from him, reading the papers she had guarded with her life. The deeds. "You're awake," she said, not looking up. "Why?" Silas croaked. "Why save me? I came to put you in a cage." Winona looked at him then. Her eyes were hard, reflecting the dying embers. "Because you're a witness now, Silas, whether you like it or not, and because I needed your height to get off that ledge." She tossed the papers onto his lap. "Look at them." Silas picked up the documents with his good hand. They were standard land claims, stamped with the territorial seal. He squinted at the names. Jericho Freeman, Sarah Two Elk, Marcus Washington. "I don't understand," Silas said. "These are just homesteads." "Look at the location," Winona pointed. "Beaver Creek Valley." Silas frowned. "That's worthless scrubland. Why would the governor kill for that?" "It was worthless," Winona corrected. "Until they found the coal seams. Vance knows the railroad needs a new fueling depot. He wants the land. But he couldn't buy it, because the people living there, freed slaves and Lakota families who intermarried, they wouldn't sell. It's the only home they have where they aren't hunted." She leaned forward, her voice trembling with a righteous fury. "So Vance didn't try to buy it anymore. He declared the deeds invalid. He forged signatures transferring the ownership to a shell company. I was his clerk, Silas. I saw him do it. I stole the originals before he could burn them. These papers prove those families own the land. Without these, Vance sends the cavalry to evict them. He'll burn their houses with them inside and call it progress." Silas stared at the papers. He remembered the orders he used to follow in the army. Clear the area. Pacify the resistance. He had burned villages like that. He had told himself he was a soldier following orders. "He told me you were a thief," Silas whispered. "I am a thief," Winona said, adding a piece of wood to the fire. "I stole his future to save theirs." Silas closed his eyes. The pain in his shoulder was a dull throb now, overshadowed by the sharp twist of karma in his gut. He had been sent to destroy the very people he should have been protecting. "We have to get these to Judge Holloway in Denver," Silas said. "He's a federal judge. Vance can't touch him." "Denver is 400 miles away," Winona replied. "And between here and there, every bounty hunter in the territory is looking for a Lakota woman and a one-armed cripple." "Then we need help," Silas said. "I know a man, Elias Thorne, my brother. He runs a trading post in the valley below. He hates Vance as much as I do." It was the first time Silas had mentioned family. It was also his first mistake. The descent into the valley took 2 days. The storm had broken, leaving the world scoured, clean, and bright. To any observer, they looked like a ragged pair of beggars. Silas leaning heavily on Winona, his arm bound in a sling made from her petticoat. They reached the trading post at dusk. It was a sturdy log structure near the river crossing, surrounded by a corral of nervous horses. A sign above the door creaked in the wind. "Thorne's Dry Goods and Livery." Silas stumbled onto the porch and hammered on the door. It opened to reveal a bear of a man. Elias Thorne was older than Silas, with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that were constantly darting, assessing value. "Silas?" Elias squinted. Then his face broke into a grin. "Well, I'll be damned. The prodigal son returns, and he looks like he went through a meat grinder." "Help us, Eli," Silas rasped. "We need horses and supplies, and no questions." Elias looked at Winona. His smile faltered. He didn't see a woman. He saw a race, and he saw trouble. "Who's the squaw?" "She's with me," Silas said sharply. "She saved my life." Elias hesitated, then stepped back. "Come in, then. Get out of the cold." The inside of the post was warm, smelling of coffee and tobacco. Elias poured them stiff drinks of whiskey. He played the part of the concerned brother perfectly. He bandaged Silas's shoulder with fresh linen and gave them stew made from venison. "You're in a mess, Si," Elias said, leaning against the counter. "Word is out. Governor Vance has a $5,000 bounty on a hostile and her accomplice. They say she murdered a clerk in Helena." "That's a lie," Winona said, her voice steady. "Vance is the murderer," Elias chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Truth don't matter much out here, darling. Only gold does." "We need fresh horses in the morning," Silas said. "We're heading to Denver." "Denver?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "That's a suicide run. The passes are blocked." "We'll make it," Silas insisted. "Just get us the horses. I'll pay you double when we get back." "You don't have a dime, Silas," Elias noted, glancing at Silas's worn boots. "But for family, I'll do it. You two sleep in the back room. I'll prep the gear." Silas felt a wave of relief. He slumped onto the cot in the back room, exhaustion finally claiming him. Winona, however, didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the corral. Something was wrong. She had seen the way Elias looked at the saddlebag containing the deeds. It wasn't curiosity. It was hunger. And there was something else. When they arrived, the telegraph key on the counter had been silent. But 20 minutes ago, she heard the faint, rhythmic tap-tap-tap coming from the front room. Elias wasn't prepping gear. He was sending a message. "Silas," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Wake up." "What?" Silas groaned. "Your brother. He's selling us out. You're crazy. Elias's family. We had our differences, but he wouldn't—" "I heard the telegraph," Winona hissed. "And look outside." Silas dragged himself to the window. In the moonlight, he saw Elias out by the corral. He wasn't saddling horses. He was disabling them. He was lifting the hooves of the 2 strongest mares and driving nails into the quick of their frogs. Silas felt cold, colder than he had on the cliff. He's laming them, so we can't run. He's keeping us here until Vance's men arrive, Winona said. $5,000 is a lot of money for a shopkeeper. Silas checked his Colt. 2 bullets left. He had lost his rifle on the cliff. We have to go. Now. They moved silently into the main room. The floorboards creaked. Elias was sitting behind the counter, a shotgun resting on his lap. He wasn't asleep. Going somewhere? Elias asked, not turning around. Just getting water, Silas lied, his hand hovering near his holster. Elias turned slowly. The brotherly warmth was gone, replaced by a greedy, pathetic desperation. Don't lie to me, Si. I know what you're carrying. I saw the papers when you were passed out. You're sitting on a gold mine. If we burn those deeds, Vance gives me the contract for the supply line to the mines. Do you know what that's worth? They're people, Elias, Silas said, his voice trembling with rage. Families. You'd kill them for a contract? I got a family too, Elias shouted, standing up, the shotgun leveling at them. My business is failing, Silas. The railroad is bypassing this valley. I'll be destitute in a year. This is my chance. Put the gun down, Silas warned. Give me the bag and I'll let you go, Elias bargained. Just you, Silas. The girl has to stay. Vance wants a body. Silas looked at Winona. She stood tall, unafraid. She had faced death on the cliff. She wouldn't beg a coward in a general store. No, Silas said. Elias tightened his grip on the trigger. I ain't asking. The standoff was broken, not by a gunshot, but by Winona. She didn't reach for a weapon. She reached for the oil lamp hanging above the counter. With a swift motion, she smashed it onto the floor. Kerosene splashed across the dry timber floorboards, and the flame roared to life instantly, creating a wall of fire between them and Elias. Run! Winona shouted. Elias fired blindly through the flames. The buckshot tore into the wall inches from Silas's head. Silas fired back, one shot, striking Elias in the leg. The big man went down, screaming. The back door! Silas yelled. They burst out into the night air, the trading post already filling with smoke behind them. The horses in the corral were whinnying in panic. We can't ride these, Winona cried, pointing to the lamed mares. There. Silas pointed to a mule tethered near the barn, an old pack animal Elias hadn't bothered to lame. They scrambled onto the mule's bare back, Winona in front, Silas clutching her waist. They kicked the animal into a gallop just as the front windows of the trading post blew out, showering the snow with glass and sparks. As they rode into the darkness, leaving the burning pyre of his brother's betrayal behind, Silas realized the truth. The wilderness hadn't killed him. The cliff hadn't killed him. It was civilization, the greed of decent men. That was the deadliest trap of all. But the fire would attract attention. Vance's men would see the smoke for miles. The hunt wasn't over. It had just begun. The mule died 5 miles from the railhead. It simply lay down in the snow and refused to rise, its old heart giving out under the strain of the flight. Silas and Winona walked the rest of the way to the water tower at Rock Creek Station. Silas was fading. The infection in his shoulder was spreading. Red streaks were crawling up his neck, and his skin was burning to the touch. He stumbled, his boots catching on the railroad ties. "Leave me!" Silas wheezed, his breath rattling in his chest. "I'm slowing you down. Vance's men will be checking the passenger cars. You can slip into a cargo hold." Winona grabbed his good arm, hauling him upright. "We started this together, Thorne. We finish it together. Besides, you're my shield. If they start shooting, I need a distraction." It was a grim joke, but it made Silas smirk. When the Union Pacific steam engine hissed to a halt to refill its water tanks, they didn't buy tickets. They waited in the shadows of the water tower until the conductor looked away, then sprinted for the livestock cars near the rear. They slid the heavy slat door open and rolled inside, landing in dirty straw amidst a herd of nervous cattle heading for slaughter in Denver. The train lurched into motion, the rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels drowning out their heavy breathing. It was warmer in the cattle car, the body heat of the animals providing a reprieve from the biting wind. Winona checked Silas's wound. It was angry and swollen. She tore a strip from the hem of her dress, soaking it in the last of the whiskey they had taken from Elias's store. "This will hurt," she warned. "Everything hurts," Silas mumbled. As she cleaned the wound, Silas watched her. In the dim light filtering through the slats, she looked less like a fugitive, and more like the warrior Vance claimed she was. "You said Vance forged the deeds," Silas said, trying to keep his mind off the pain. "But why did you stay? You could have run. You could have gone to Canada." Winona paused, her hands hovering over his shoulder. "My father was a surveyor for the army. He believed in the law. He said that if we learned the white man's paper, we could protect our land better than with arrows. When Vance killed him to silence him about the coal surveys, I didn't run. I got a job in Vance's office. I spent 2 years making his coffee and filing his lies, waiting for the moment he slipped up." She looked at Silas, her eyes fierce. "I'm not running, Silas, I'm hunting." The train slowed 3 hours later. They weren't in Denver yet. "Why are we stopping?" Silas whispered, reaching for his Colt. "Cheyenne Station," Winona said, peeking through the slats. "We have to switch tracks." Outside, voices drifted down the line. Heavy boots crunched on the gravel. Lanterns swung back and forth. "Check every car!" a voice roared. It wasn't a conductor. It was the captain of Vance's private guard, a man named Carson. "The governor says they're on this line. Shoot on sight." Silas struggled to his feet. "They know." "How?" "My brother," Silas spat. "He probably telegraphed the destination before we burned him out. They know we're heading to the federal court." The footsteps were getting closer. The cattle lowed nervously. "We can't fight them all," Winona said, looking around the confined space. "There are too many." Silas looked at the heavy sliding door, then at the cattle. A desperate idea formed in his fevered brain. "We don't need to fight," Silas said. "We need a stampede." "Inside a train?" "We're stopped. If we spook the herd, they'll break the door. In the confusion, we slip out the other side and jump the coal tender." Silas didn't wait. He fired his Colt into the ceiling of the car. The explosion of noise in the enclosed space sent the 50 steers into a frenzy. They panicked, a ton of beef muscle surging toward the slat door. The wood splintered with a deafening crack, and the door flew off its hinges, flattening the 2 guards standing outside. "Go!" Silas yelled. Cattle poured out onto the platform, a chaotic river of horns and hooves. The station erupted into shouting and gunfire. Guards were trampled or forced to dive for cover. In the mayhem, Silas and Winona slipped out the opposite side of the car, rolling under the train carriage and crawling across the tracks. They scrambled up the ladder of the coal tender, just as the engineer, terrified by the commotion, threw the throttle open to escape the riot. The train lurched forward, leaving the chaos of Cheyenne behind. But as Silas pulled himself over the lip of the coal pile, a bullet pinged off the metal railing, grazing his knuckles. He looked back. Carson was on the platform, rifle raised. He hadn't been trampled, and he was signaling for a separate locomotive, a light pursuit engine, to fire up. "They're following us," Silas shouted over the wind. "We have 2 hours to Denver, and they'll be right behind us." The ground did not welcome them. It rose up to meet them with the violence of a sledgehammer. Silas and Winona hit the cinder-packed earth of the Denver rail yard at 20 miles an hour. They didn't land. They collided with the world. Silas took the brunt of it, his body curling instinctively around Winona's smaller frame as they tumbled down the steep, grassy embankment. The world spun in a chaotic blur of grey sky, black coal dust, and white snow. They crashed through a patch of dead briars and came to a halt in a drainage ditch filled with icy sludge. For a long minute, there was no sound but the receding hiss of the steam engine and the ragged, wet tearing of Silas's breath. "Silas!" Winona's voice was small, trembling not with fear, but with the shock of impact. She scrambled out of the mud, her hands frantically searching his coat. "Silas, move, please, you have to move." Silas Thorne lay face down in the freezing mire. His vision was tunneling, the edges of the world painted in a pulsating, sickly yellow. The infection in his shoulder, aggravated by the fall and the filth, was no longer just a localized pain. It was a systemic fire consuming his nervous system. He could feel the fever boiling the sweat on his forehead, even as the slush froze his legs. He groaned, a guttural sound that scraped against his throat. I'm here." He tried to push himself up, but his right arm was dead weight, a useless appendage of agony. Winona grabbed his left lapel, her grip like iron. She hauled him up, her boots slipping in the muck, until he was sitting against the concrete retaining wall of the ditch. He looked at her. She was unrecognizable. The civilized calico dress was torn to ribbons, stained with grease and blood. Her face was masked in soot, her eyes two stark white orbs of fierce determination in a canvas of darkness. She looked like a spirit dredged up from the underworld. "We aren't dead," Silas rasped, a bloody smile touching his lips. "That's a start." "The train is gone," Winona said, looking up toward the tracks. "But the pursuit engine, I can hear the whistle. They're half a mile back. They'll be unloading horses. We have to get into the city." Silas nodded, but when he tried to stand, his knees buckled. The fever spiked, sending a wave of vertigo crashing through him. He slumped back against the concrete. "I can't," he whispered, the admission tasting like ash. "Winona, I can't walk 4 miles. The poison is in the blood now. I can feel it." Winona knelt before him. She didn't offer pity. She didn't offer false hope. She reached into the tattered remains of her bodice and pulled out the oilskin packet containing the deeds. She held them up, forcing his delirious eyes to focus on them. "You didn't come this far to die in a ditch, Silas Thorne. You didn't haul me up a cliff face and burn down your own brother's legacy just to quit because your shoulder hurts. We are going to Judge Sterling, and you are going to walk. I'm slowing you down," he argued, his head lolling. "Take the papers. Run. The alleyways. You disappear good." "I am not a thief anymore," she hissed, grabbing his face with both hands, smearing soot onto his pale cheeks. "And you are not a killer. We are citizens, and we are walking into that courthouse through the front door. Now get up." Something in her voice, a command that superseded his pain, sparked a final reserve of adrenaline in Silas's adrenal glands. He gritted his teeth so hard he felt a molar crack. With a roar of effort that startled a flock of crows from the telephone wires above, he forced his body upright. He leaned heavily on her, his good arm draped over her shoulders. She took his weight without complaint, becoming his crutch, his compass, and his conscience. They moved out of the rail yard and into the labyrinth of the warehouse district. Denver was waking up. The air was thick with the smell of burning coal and unwashed bodies. Drays pulled by massive Clydesdales clattered over cobblestones, and factory whistles shrieked the start of the shift. To the workers they passed, they looked like spectres. 2 battered, bloody wrecks limping through the dawn. Men stepped aside, eyes widening in mixture of disgust and fear. A street urchin selling newspapers froze as they passed, his mouth gaping at the Colt peacemaker hanging loosely at Silas's hip. "Keep your head down," Silas muttered. "If a beat cop sees us—" "Vance owns the police," Winona replied, her eyes scanning the rooftops. "If a cop sees us, we don't go to jail. We go to the morgue." They navigated the back alleys, moving parallel to Larimer Street. The city, usually a beacon of civilization compared to the Badlands, felt more dangerous than the open range. Here, the predators wore uniforms and badges. As they neared the city center, the atmosphere changed. The streets were quieter, the buildings taller. They reached the corner of 14th and Larimer, the federal courthouse looming ahead, a massive structure of red sandstone, pillars of justice rising into the cold morning sky. It looked impenetrable, and it was. Silas stopped, pulling Winona into the recessed doorway of a haberdashery. "Look." Winona peered around the corner. Her breath hitched. The street in front of the courthouse wasn't open. It was a fortress. 2 carriages were parked sideways across the cobblestones, blocking the approach. Standing in a semicircle before the steps were 8 men. They wore the dusters of deputies, but they held themselves like hired guns. And in the center, pacing like a caged tiger, was Governor Samuel Vance. He looked immaculate. He was clean-shaven, his beaver fur coat brushing his polished boots, a stark contrast to the filth covering Silas and Winona. He was smoking a cigar, checking a gold pocket watch. He knew. "He knew we'd come here," Winona whispered. "He knew it was the only play we had." "He's not waiting for an arrest," Silas noted, his military eye assessing the kill zone. "Look at the rifles. Those aren't law enforcement issue. Those are repeating Winchesters. He's set up a firing squad. So we can't go in." "No," Silas said softly. "We can't go in. Not both of us." He looked at Winona. The fever had receded into a cold, sharp clarity. He knew, with the certainty of a man who had seen death a dozen times, that this was the end of the line. There was no clever trick left, no hidden ledge, no stampede. There was only the math of violence. "Give me the deeds," Silas said. "What? No." "Winona, listen to me. I'm going to walk out there. I'm going to make a scene. I'm going to draw every eye and every gun barrel to me. When the shooting starts, the deputies on the left flank will move toward me. That leaves the alley by the judge's chambers open. You slip in the side entrance." "You'll die," she said, her voice cracking. "Silas, they will cut you down before you take 10 steps." "I'm a dead man anyway," he gestured to his blackening shoulder. "The infection is in the lymph nodes. I have a day, maybe 2, before the sepsis takes my mind. Let me use the time I have left." He reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. It was the first time he had touched her with tenderness, rather than necessity. "You asked me to get you higher," he whispered. "This is the lift. Take it." Winona stared at him, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her cheeks. She wanted to argue, to fight, but she saw the resolve in his eyes. It was the look of a soldier who had finally found a war worth fighting. She shoved the oilskin packet into her dress. She didn't say goodbye. She grabbed his hand, squeezed it until her knuckles turned white, and then pulled away, melting into the shadows of the alleyway. Silas waited 10 seconds. He checked his Colt. 1 bullet. He spun the cylinder, snapping it shut with a flick of his wrist. He straightened his spine, ignoring the screaming protest of his body. He adjusted his tattered hat. Then Silas Thorne stepped out of the shadows and into the sun. He walked right down the center of Larimer Street. His boots rang out on the cobblestones. Clack, clack, clack. A lonely, rhythmic defiance. A silence swept over the street. Pedestrians froze. The deputies turned. Governor Vance stopped pacing and looked up, a sneer curling his lip. "Well," Vance called out, his voice booming theatrically, "the rat crawls out of the sewer." Silas didn't stop. He kept walking, closing the distance. 50 yards, 40. "Stop right there, Thorne," Vance commanded. "You are under arrest for the kidnapping of Winona Blackstream and the attempted murder of a state official." Silas stopped 30 yards away. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, his hand hanging loosely by his gun. He looked at the deputies, meeting their eyes one by one. "Kidnapping!" Silas shouted, his voice rough but projecting with the power of the drill sergeant he once was. "I see no hostage, Governor. I see a man you hired to do your dirty work." A crowd was gathering. Shopkeepers were stepping out. Commuters were stopping their carriages. This was the theatre Silas needed. "This man," Silas pointed a shaking finger at Vance, "paid me $2,000 to murder a witness. He forged land deeds to steal the Beaver Creek Valley from veterans and widows. He is not a governor. He is a horse thief in a silk suit." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Vance's face turned a violent shade of red. He could feel the eyes of the city on him. He saw the doubt in the faces of the crowd. "He's delirious!" Vance shouted to the crowd, spreading his arms. "He's a deserter and a drunkard. He's armed. Deputies, take him down!" The deputies raised their rifles. The metallic clack-clack of lever actions, chambering rounds, echoed off the brick buildings. But they didn't fire. Not yet. Killing a man in cold blood in front of 50 witnesses was hard, even for hired guns. "Fire, damn you!" Vance screamed. Silas saw movement in his periphery. To the right of the courthouse, a shadow slipped through the side gate. Winona was inside. He just needed a few more seconds. "Is this the law?" Silas roared, looking at the deputies. "I fought for the Union. I bled for the 7th. Did you boys serve? Or did you just learn to shoot cans off a fence post?" One of the deputies lowered his rifle slightly, shame flickering in his eyes. Vance saw he was losing control. He snatched a double-barreled shotgun from the man next to him. "If you cowards won't do it, I will." Vance raised the shotgun. The black twin tunnels of death stared Silas in the face. Silas didn't reach for his gun. He didn't try to shoot Vance. That would be murder. Instead, he did the only thing that would save the papers. He made himself the target. "Come on, Vance!" Silas laughed, a wild, manic sound. "Show them who you are. Pull the trigger!" Vance's finger tightened. Boom! The shotgun blast was a physical blow. It didn't sound like a gunshot. It sounded like the sky cracking open. The buckshot caught Silas in the chest and stomach. It lifted him off his feet, throwing him backward onto the cold, hard stones. The crowd screamed. The violence broke the spell. But before Vance could rack the lever for a second shot, the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse burst open with a resounding crash that rivaled the shotgun blast. "Federal marshals, drop it!" 4 men in dark suits stormed onto the portico, rifles raised, and behind them, a man in black judicial robes, clutching a gavel like a weapon of war, Judge Sterling, and beside him, breathless and pointing, stood Winona. "Drop the weapon, Vance!" the lead marshal screamed. Vance stood frozen, the smoking shotgun in his hands. He looked at the marshals, then at the crowd, then at the bleeding man in the street. He realized with a dawning horror that he had just executed a man in front of the entire Denver voting populace. He drew on me," Vance stammered, trying to drop the gun. "It was self-defense." "Liar!" a voice rang out from the crowd. A shopkeeper stepped forward. "His hands were empty. You murdered him." "Murderer!" another voice cried. The marshals descended the stairs, surrounding the governor. They didn't ask nicely. The lead marshal slammed the butt of his rifle into Vance's stomach, doubling him over, and cuffed his hands behind his back before he hit the ground. The deputies dropped their weapons, raising their hands, eager to distance themselves from the fallen tyrant. But Winona didn't watch the arrest. She didn't look at the vindication of her life's work. She was already running down the stairs, her skirts flying, tearing across the cobblestones toward the unmoving heap of dark fabric in the street. "Silas!" She slid to her knees in the blood. It was everywhere, bright, arterial red mixing with the black mud. Silas was lying on his back, staring up at the morning sky. His chest was a ruin. His breath came in wet, bubbling gasps. "I'm here," Winona sobbed, pressing her hands over the wounds, trying desperately to hold the life inside him. "I'm here, Silas. Look at me." Silas's eyes drifted to hers. They were hazy, the pupils blown wide. The pain was gone now, replaced by a spreading numbness that felt like sinking into a warm bath. "Did," Silas coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Did she make it?" "I made it," Winona cried, tears dripping onto his face. "Sterling has the deeds. He's reading them now. Vance is in chains. You did it. You beat him." Silas tried to nod, but his neck wouldn't listen. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. Not bad for a deserter. "You're not a deserter," Winona said fiercely, smoothing the hair back from his damp forehead. "You're a hero. Do you hear me? You're the best man I ever knew." The sounds of the city, the shouting crowd, the clanking of handcuffs, the distant train whistles began to fade for Silas. The light was changing. The grey sky was turning a brilliant, blinding white. He remembered the cliff. He remembered the weight of her on his shoulders, the cold wind, the impossible geometry of survival. "Higher," she had said. "I need you higher." He looked at Winona one last time. He saw the strength in her face, the survival he had bought with his blood. He realized he wasn't just a hired gun anymore. He was the foundation. He was the rock she had stood on to reach the light. "Winona," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I'm here. Don't let them put a heavy stone on me." "I won't," she promised, her voice breaking. "I promise." "Good. I think I'm done climbing." The light in his hazel eyes flickered once, like a candle caught in a draught, and then went out. Silas Thorne let out a long, rattling breath, and his body settled heavily onto the earth. Winona didn't scream. She didn't wail. She slumped forward, resting her forehead against his still chest. She stayed there for a long time, ignoring the marshals who came to check the body, ignoring the crowd that pressed in with morbid curiosity. She stayed there until the heat left him, memorizing the rhythm of a heart that had stopped beating for her. When Judge Sterling finally approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, Winona rose. She stood up slowly, her dress soaked in the blood of the man who had hunted her, then saved her. She looked at the judge. She looked at the governor, who was being dragged toward a paddy wagon, spitting curses. She wiped her eyes with the back of her bloody hand. The tears were gone. In their place was something harder, something permanent. "Ms. Blackstream," Judge Sterling said softly, "we need to take your statement." Winona looked down at Silas one last time. She reached down and gently closed his eyes. She picked up his hat, which had fallen in the mud, and dusted it off. "I have a statement," she said, her voice ringing clear and cold across the silent square. She looked at the crowd, at the city, at the world that had tried to bury them both. "Write this down," she commanded. "Silas Thorne did not die a criminal. He died a free man. And from this day on, the valley he died for belongs to the people." She turned and walked up the courthouse steps, clutching Silas's hat to her chest. She didn't look back. She had a war to finish, and she would finish it from the high ground he had given her. Silas Thorne wasn't a perfect man. He was a hired gun, a broken soldier, and a sinner. But in his final moments, he proved that redemption isn't about erasing your past. It's about deciding, just once, to stand between the innocent and the dark. He gave his life not for gold, but for a stranger who showed him that some things are worth dying for. If this story moved you, if you believe that the truth is worth fighting for no matter the cost, please hit that like button. It helps us share these forgotten legends with the world. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a journey into the Wild West. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the deepest canyon, there is always a way up. Thanks for watching.